Okay. Right. So I hope my screen is up. So you'll see that in one of the participant lists, there'll be my name again, Sufis, but in chat. So basically, if you have any questions or messages, just put it in the chat and I will see it in a different account. And if you want to send anything anonymously, maybe you're shy or whatever, maybe you can just send it to Sufis chat instead so that I can see it there, right? Okay, so before we jump into this, just want to gauge how you guys are feeling this morning. So from 1 to 10, what's your energy levels right now? So 1 being, really exhausted, really sleepy, not ready for the day, and 10 being, you're really energized and ready to take on the day. So 1 to 10, how do you feel? Just put it in the chat. All right, just want to see some energy levels right now. If you are fasting, then maybe your energy level is a bit lower than usual, but that's fine. 6.8. That's interesting. 7. Okay, I see like everyone's hovering around 7 now. 7. Is this like someone said 7, then you follow like, oh, I don't want to be higher or lower, let's put 7 as well, right? Okay, so seeing some 7s and 8s, so pretty decent, not so bad. Okay, all right. So I think I'm pretty much feeling an 8 myself. So hopefully it stays that way or goes up along the way. All right. So today's topic will be on how to drive engagement in any environment. And this is the 3rd episode of a 6-part series in collaboration with Common Ground. So this entire series will be on gamification behavioral design. So some of you may have joined in for the past 2 episodes. So great if you're back here again. Thanks for the support and hopefully you'll be getting a lot of value from this series. To those who just joined in, if you like what you see or hear today, do consider opting in for the rest of the episodes in the series and hopefully you'll get more value as well, right? We'll keep this fairly casual. If you have any questions, you can put it in the chat, or if you want to be a bit more, you want to listen to everything first, there'll be a Q&A session at the end, and you can also save your questions for that section as well, right? So let's dive in. Okay, so before we begin, some house rules, right? So ideally keep your video on. I do want to see if you are real people and not bots. This is like, to see, are you really human? So keep your video on, but you can keep your microphone off unless you have a question. Get comfortable, make sure you're sitting somewhere comfortable. If you can drink water and eat food, you can have food and snacks, we're fine. Be comfortable as well for that. Ideally, join us with a computer if you can, because there'll be some things that will be easier to do on your computer as opposed to mobile. But if you have no choice, you're on mobile, that's fine as well. And try not to spam the chat with unnecessary stuff. You can keep it relevant to the topic or to the conversation, or if you have any questions, or if you're answering my questions, okay? Yes, there'll be a recording. There's recordings of the first 2 episodes. We will share it with you after this. We'll figure that. If you want to get those episodes, just let me know. I'll figure out some way to share it with you. I can't do this right now on the chat, but I'll try to share it with you somehow. Okay. Right. So let me introduce myself. My name is Sufis. And this is how I look like, right? Hopefully the picture matches the video feed. So I'm a gamification behavioral design consultant. So what that means is that I work with companies to design frameworks revolve around gamification behavioral design, right? So this can be for websites, apps, for training programs, for employee engagement programs. It can be anything, as long as there's a person involved there's users involved. My role will be there. If it's for robots, obviously there's no need for gamification behavioral design. I run my own company called Rico Consult. So we're a gamification behavioral design consultancy. We're based in Malaysia, but we work with clients locally and abroad. And I'm a certified Octalysis gamification practitioner. So if you don't know what that means, it's fine. It's basically one of the few gamification frameworks out there. And I'm one of the few who are certified. I think for Octalysis in particular, there's only 130 people certified in the world because it's quite hard to get certified. And, I guess I just got lucky. Right, so I work with Fortune 500s, multinationals, conglomerates, blah, blah, blah. I like working with startups a lot because they're very fun. And most of my clients right now are startups. I've had the privilege of designing award-winning solutions using gamification. I don't own them. I've helped clients and past companies I work with build those solutions. So good opportunity for me as well. I'm related with a lot of different associations, including Play 14, which Laxman is familiar with. So that's how I got to know Laxman, who's also joining our session today. The rest, if you're interested, you can Google those up. I'd rather not explain them. It's quite lengthy. And I'm also a corporate trainer. This happened by accident, but I've since conducted training for about maybe 3-4 years now. Okay, so let's move on. So first and foremost, I want to know from you, what would you like to gain from this talk, right? From this session. So what we'll do is that we'll open up the floor and I want you guys to go to slido.com and type in this code 170165, or just scan this QR code if you have your mobile handy. And then you'll bring you to a page where you can submit a question. So that way we all can see it, and it'll be interesting to see how many questions we get. So what do you want to gain from this talk? Okay, not questions, how many how many submissions we can get. So I want to know what you guys are expecting from this talk so that I can also tailor the content and the delivery to fit your expectations and what you're looking for a bit better, right? So again, this talk is not for me, it's for you guys. So I would suggest putting in your what you want to see. Information. Wow, that's amazing. Okay. All right, so that's a very insightful point there. How do we increase long-term engagement? Okay, that's good. Yes, there'll be information, lots of it. Whether it's relevant or not, that's up to you. I hope it will be relevant. So if you can give me a bit more precise expectations, I can also be more precise in the delivery as well. Any more? So we have 2 so far. I'll give it another 30 seconds. How to convert engagement into a habit? Okay, that's quite interesting. I'll share this. I didn't put anything specifically to habit building here, but it is tied to habit building. So just to share, actually the content I had prepared previously for this was too much. It was about maybe 2 to 3 hours long. So I had to cut it down quite a bit. So hopefully you'll still be able to get a lot out of it. If you have any questions, again, you can ask me later and I'll be happy to answer them, right? So any more expectations or anything that you want to see in this talk, I'll give it another 5 seconds. What's new to engagement with gamification? Okay, that's a good one. Let's share a bit more about how gamification can drive engagement. So just to share, as we are waiting for more input, gamification has been around for about 20 years or so. It only started gaining traction 10 years ago. The 10 years prior to that, it was kind of just, it existed by accident because someone coined the term gamification, but nobody knew what it was, right? As of 10 years ago, it started getting popular, but nobody really knew how to use it properly either. So what was happening was that there was not enough science to back up the way gamification was functioning. So it was just purely based on assumptions and all that. And what happened was that people started using gamification haphazardly, and it led to a lot of mixed outcomes. Most of them were not very positive, and since then people had this perception that gamification is fluffy. In reality, it's actually very effective. It just boils down to how you use it. So that's the point of this series, to kind of spread awareness and kind of build that understanding that gamification is not just about points, badges, leaderboards. It's a lot more than that, right? I see one question in the chat. Is there an ethical code with gamification? I think one of the episodes will be on ethics of gamification. There is actually an ethical code, right? So one of the associations I'm with is called the Gamification Code of Ethics, where you have to pledge to a list of ethical codes that you abide to. So I actually only practice gamification ethically. I've had some people reach out to me for unethical reasons for gamification, which I've said no, including MLMs and things like that. So you can actually use gamification to kind of manipulate people. It's actually not that difficult if you know how. But of course, that's why the ethical part is very important. What is an example of an attraction point or retention to gamification? I'll share that as well. How do we differentiate fake gamification versus real gamification? I don't think there's anything fake about gamification. I would rephrase this as to effective and not so effective gamification, which I'll share a bit as we go as well. All right, so let's move on. If you have any more, just put it in the chat as we'll be moving on from this page. Okay, so let me just introduce gamification, right? So what is gamification? There's been a lot of misconceptions on what gamification is, how it works. So let's kind of clear this up with a definition. So it's a process of adding games or game-like elements to something so that it encourages participation, right? So gamification doesn't mean making something to a game for the sake of it. It's actually to ultimately drive some sort of behavior or participation into something, right? And how do you differentiate games and gamification? So a game is kind of a closed system where whatever happens in a game stays in the game. So you interact with the game itself. It has its own rules and it doesn't affect anything in the real world, right? So it's kind of like Vegas. What happens is in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? So same things with games. But gamification is different, where whatever happens in gamification, it's meant to encourage an outward interaction, right? So there's always a call to action. It's the desired behaviors that the businesses or the designer wants to see. So it's always a means to an end. So it's meant to motivate or encourage people to do something, right? It could be anything. It could be to buy something. It could be to share something. It could be to press something, or whatever it may be, right? So let's dive in on what engagement is and how it fits into this whole picture. So gamification, the misconception is that it's all about points, badges, leaderboards, right? You drive engagement and retention using these three elements. So what happened was that there have been some success in using those three gamification elements. Is it the only ones? No. Are they the best ones? It really depends, right? The short answer is that it depends on what you're trying to build and what your objectives are. So if your business metrics are such, not all elements will fit, right? So you have to see what your metrics are, and then you want to know what your desired behaviors are. So basically, what you want your users to do or behave, and then you identify what elements, gamify elements that you want to park into your experience, right? We call it experience because it's a bit more general. And experience can encompass things like websites, apps, physical environment, training program, anything, right? Right. So engagement by itself is a catch-all term. So even this is pretty vague. If you Google engagement, you get a lot of different like hits on Google and whatever it may be. But basically, for in all intents and purposes, it's encompassing any interactions users have with the experience, such as the product or service. It could also encompass users like employees or learners. And the primary goal is to measure the leading indicators of whether users find the experience valuable enough to come back or continue using it, right? So ultimately, it's about delivering value. So you could have something valuable to the user already. So of course, you must make sure that the experience is valuable to the user. If not, they will not be interested at all. Assuming it's valuable, you want to make sure that the way they interact with it will also deliver that value. So that value is communicated properly to the user, right? Okay, so how do you then differentiate different types of measurements, right? So because engagement is so vague or is so wide, it also captures different kinds of people. So you have your users or customers, you have employees, and you also have learners, and all of them engage with an experience differently, right? And the way you measure those engagements are also different. So when it comes to users or customers, you will look at things like, say, how often they use it, how much time they spend in the experience, whether they click certain things, whether they search a lot, whether they like, comment, and things like that, or they added items to their cart and ultimately purchase things, right? So depending on what your experience entails, this will differ. But generally, you might have some of this, especially if it's on a virtual or online platform. But when you talk about employees, it's different, right? Because they are typically in a working environment or an office, or maybe even an online working environment, because again, with today's COVID situation. But you want to measure things like their performance, how satisfied they are with the workplace, how much ideas do they contribute and generate for the company, how punctual they are, how often they are absent from the workplace, how are their relationships with their coworkers and teamwork, and so on and so forth. And lastly are learners. Learners, again, different, right? But engagement is also important to measure. So it could be in terms of how much retention they have of the lessons that are delivered during a particular class session or whatever it may be, the discussions they have, and the quality of those discussions, how many questions they've asked, how much they've completed the lesson materials like homework, assignments, or things like that, and how well they collaborate with other learners, right? So this paints a picture as to how different engagement can be to different people, right? So some of you may be from companies that build products, some of you may be delivering training programs, some of you may have just your own employees you're trying to engage with. And ultimately, what we'll be sharing today should spread across all three types of users or people as much as possible, right? Okay, so let's dive in a bit more. So how do you drive engagement, right? So I remember some of you mentioned about habits, about effective or fake versus real gamification and things like that. So this should paint a bit of a picture as to how do you answer those questions, right? So let's start with a quote, right? People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you make them feel. right? So this is by American poet. I actually don't know who this poet is, to be fair with you, but it's an American poet, so I'm sure it's very popular. They're very established and well known. I'm not much of a poet myself, so but what you want to take from this is that engagement really drives how people feel about the experience, right? And that's really what you want to strive for. How do they feel? So if they feel positive about the experience, they will come back and they will be loyal to the experience as well, to the point of being even habitual, right? So how do you create an environment that drives engagement, right? So ultimately, engagement is all about having the right environment. And there's a lot of things you need to consider. In fact, if it were up to me, this list would be a little longer. But for today's purpose, I've condensed it and kind of captured just the main things that you really want to have. And this will aim to, one, give them value, make them feel that they can trust the experience, they can put in minimal effort for the best output, they get feedback, they are motivated, and they are invested in the experience. So what does it all mean? So when you talk about value, basically you want to make sure that they get the right value that fits them. Obviously, if this is not checked, they will not be in the experience at all. They will just see like, oh, this is not relevant to me, I'll leave. But once you see value in the experience, you want to make sure that you have the right call to action or trigger so that you will drive and communicate their value properly, right? So if they're looking for, say, information, you want to have certain triggers or call to actions that will allow them to access that information, right? Otherwise, there's no point. The next bit is trust. So how you build trust with users is one show. Branding is one thing, but aside from branding, which takes time to build, you want to make sure that the experience makes them feel safe and is seamless, right? And safety, depending on who you are and depending on who your users are, this can spread across different things. It could be psychological safety, it could be actual physical safety and things like that. I don't dive in too much on that areas for today because it will be too much to digest, but bear in mind, trust is quite wide, so we'll try to keep it general for now. Effort, basically you want to make sure that whatever they do, the ability or the amount of effort they put in matches the outcome. So basically, if the outcome is not great, you want to make sure that the effort to get that is very, very minimal. But if the outcome is very, very good, it's very high, whether it's a paycheck or whatever, then you can actually increase the amount of ability required to get there, right? So we'll share about this a little more later. Immediate feedback is basically you want to give them feedback after they complete something, right? So they know that they're doing something great or they're doing something right or wrong. And motivation is basically to keep them motivated throughout the experience. And lastly, investment, so that they have a sense of ownership in the experience, so that they feel like, oh, I own a part of this in some way. I want to come back because I don't want to lose this thing that I've built so far, right? We call this the IKEA effect as well. Kind of like you value IKEA furniture a bit more than normal furniture because you actually had to build it yourself, right? Right, so let's go on with the first bit, which is because value is pretty straightforward about delivering value to the user and also having the right triggers and call to action, we'll just skip ahead to building trust with the user. So how do you build trust? You want to make sure that the experience is seamless, it's comfortable. And one thing you want to avoid is cognitive friction. So if your experience has cognitive friction, then you will actually have trouble building trust with the user. So this happens when a user is confronted with an interference or affordance that appears to be intuitive but delivers unexpected results. What it means is that there's a mismatch in their expectations. They expected an outcome to be like this. So they do one action, they'll get this outcome. But because it didn't match the expectation, it causes friction, right? And it impairs the user experience. If not, it can even jeopardize it. It's kind of like when you go to a website or an app or you walk to a store, right? You expect a certain level of service or experience, but then you get something completely opposite. If it's something better than you expected, that is fine. But if it's something worse or different, then it will create cognitive friction. And cognitive friction can also make someone feel stupid, right? Not literally stupid, but they feel like, oh, this feels complicated, this feels confusing. I don't feel like I'm very smart in this experience. And because of that, I don't want to be here anymore. I would leave. So if you don't get this first part correct, no matter how much value you give, they will leave the experience, right? So make sure that they feel comfortable and seamless. And how do you do this? There's a lot of ways depending on what you're building. If you're building a website or an app, you want to make sure that everything is very clear, very easy to navigate. If you're building a culture in a company, right? For example, you want to make sure that there's a lot of communication. You make them feel valued. Make sure that they know their roles and things like that. And obviously, they know how to navigate the workspace. They know where to get what they need. They know who their team members are. They know who their superiors are. So those are pretty basic stuff, but you must get them correct, which people always overlook, right? They think that, look, I'm delivering value. It doesn't matter that the experience is messy. They have to figure it out, because if they don't figure it out, they don't get the value, and it's their loss. And if you have that mindset, then you lose a lot of engagement, right? And the last bit is learners. Obviously, you want to make sure that the learning experience is very comfortable as well, right? If you give them something very difficult to understand right off the bat, obviously they feel stupid, and they'll be like, you know what, I can't do this, I can't learn, I'm just going to be disengaged from the experience entirely, right? So that's about building trust. So now, how do you optimize effort, right? So effort, there's two ways to look at it. One is to make it really easy for the user. Another one is to make sure that you give them the right level of difficulty to match their expectations, right? So depending on the experience you're trying to create, you will lean towards either side, right? So I'm introducing this again. So if you have joined past episodes, you might have seen this before. So BJ Fogg's behavioral model. So basically, BJ Fogg talks about three things in driving behaviors. You talk about having motivation, having ability, and the right trigger to drive those two, right? So what this means is that if you want to motivate someone to do something, you must make sure that if it's something very difficult to do, that means you must give a lot of motivation, right? This could be in terms of rewards, in terms of intrinsic motivations, whatever it may be. The more difficult it is, the more motivation you must provide for them to be able to be willing to complete the action. But if it's very easy to do, like pressing a button, for example, right, then you don't need to put in a lot of motivation. If you deliver a lot of motivation, then it just makes it more compelling for them to press that button, for example. But even if you put low motivation, it should be sufficient, right? So again, match the motivation level with the amount of effort they have to put in. Which brings us to the next bit, which is ability, right? So they have to be able to perform the desired behavior. So if it's something easy, then it's not a problem, like pressing a button. But if it's something really, really difficult, right? So for example, if you need to learn a new software, or if you need to learn a new theory or a new framework, or something that's very difficult for you to comprehend or understand, then you want to make sure that you teach them, right? We call this the onboarding experience. You teach them how to use something. And the more difficult it is, the more handholding you have to give at the beginning. And another way to combat things is to make it easier to digest or make it easy to do. So again, depending on what you're trying to create. So if you're trying to create, say, a website, then obviously you want to make it as easy as possible, because you have no reason to make it difficult to press a button, for example, or to get to certain content or pages. But if you're trying to build a learning environment, you're trying to teach them something difficult, something very technical, something very complex, obviously it's very hard to make it simple, right? Even if you make it as simple as possible, if the person is not well versed with it, it's going to be still difficult. So then you really have to handhold them and give them a lot of motivation, a lot of guidance, so that they are able to overcome that challenge or barrier, right? And the last bit is, of course, the trigger. So if without a trigger, which we talked about in the first bit with value, without this trigger present, nobody will be aware that they're supposed to do something, right? Whether it is having a button present in front of you, visibly present, and it's very obvious as well. Kind of like when you go to Google, when you go to the Google search page, the only thing you see is, or the most obvious thing is the search bar, right? You only have the search bar, and then you have the search button to kind of execute whatever you type in the search bar, or you just click feeling lucky, right? That's pretty much all you can do on Google's page. And it makes it very easy and very clear what the call to action is, right? So the idea is that when you make it noticeable and actionable, meaning easy to actually do, people will carry out the action. So when you have all these three components present, which is motivation, ability, and a clear trigger, you are able to drive the right behaviors that you want to see in your experience, right? And again, this spans across websites, workplace environments, also learning environments, right? Oh, sorry, not just websites, a product or a service, okay? So let's move on. Again, if you have any questions, immediately put it in the chat and I'll see and I can answer your questions as well, right? So one other thing is, of course, immediate feedback. So you must give them immediate feedback after they do something. And feedback doesn't mean you give them critical feedback or constructive feedback, although it can be in a learning environment especially. but it goes into different areas. So we call this feedback loops. So a feedback loop is part of a system in which some portion of that system output is used as input for future behavior. Okay, what this means is that when you do something, the system will capture that input and decide what to do with the information. It will either lead to a certain output, or it will store the information for something to happen in the future, right? It really depends on what your system or experience is. And this often starts with a call to action or trigger, which will notify the user to do something, right? So once they know that, oh, I'm supposed to do something, and assuming the ability and the motivation is sufficient, they have done the action. And the system will provide a form of feedback, right? It could be in terms of you going to a different page on the website, or a bar will fill up, or a number will increase or decrease on your page, or you are able to complete an exercise, or you're able to access certain content, or you're able to complete a job task, or you're able to get some sort of reaction from a system otherwise, right? And this creates a state change, right? And the reason why you want to see this state change is because if you didn't have some sort of feedback present, you don't know whether you're doing something right or wrong, or you're doing something at all. The last thing you want to do is you press a button and nothing happens. And nobody likes that, right? Even if you click a button and you hear a very satisfying click sound, that is already a form of feedback. It's kind of the reason why people are kind of obsessed with clicking their pen sometimes, or fidget spinners were a thing. They had some sort of feedback, right? And you can even provide more substantial feedback with, say, you press a button and you get, say, a cookie, or you get a reward, or you get some sort of color change. As long as a change happens somehow, some way, that is a form of feedback. And this tells the user that whatever they're doing is actually resulting to something. And that's quite important to the experience, right? It may sound very menial, but it is important because that's how you know that people are engaging with an experience. Okay. So yes, yes, that is what it's called. Okay. I'm just responding to someone in the chat. Okay, so then it lends to something called the feedback loop once again. So this is how it looks like. This comes in different shapes and forms, but for all intents and purposes, I think this is pretty clear. So the idea is that from the user's perspective, which is in the middle, the user takes an action and they get feedback. But from the system's perspective is that they will provide a call to action to the user to respond to. And then once they conduct this action, it will lead to a state change. And this state change will then drive a feedback in the system. And the faster this happens, the better, right? And I've worked with a lot of clients in the past, even right now, where they say that, look, they have to do 100 times of this, then only they get a feedback. Do you think a person will stay and do something 100 times to get feedback, as opposed to they do it one time and they get a little, even a small form of feedback? Which one do you think is more engaging? Small feedback after one immediate click of a button, example, or a huge feedback after 100 clicks? How many people do you think will complete that action? Small feedback, right? The smallest things give you the best rewards. And this is why social media is such a prevalent thing, because you do so little and you get so much back, right? You post something, you get like. Even when you press a like button on someone else's post, you'll see that the like button changes color, and also the number of likes goes up. And that's already a form of feedback. That means whatever you did actually had a reaction. And you feel like, oh, I did something. It's a small form of instant gratification. Yes, exactly, Omar, instant gratification. Thank you so much. All right, so that's how feedback loops work. So make sure that you have this in the experience that you're trying to create. Okay, so let's move on. How do you keep users motivated? Okay, so this is a very interesting thing, and there's a lot of ways to go about it. There's self-determination theory. There is a lot of things that I can't recall, but the most important thing that I like to use is called the Octalysis framework. So I use this a lot. In fact, this is what I'm certified in. So the Octalysis framework, this is part of what I practice in my consultation work, especially because I find that this is the most complete framework when it comes to motivation, right? Whether you look at, Maslow's hierarchy of needs or whatever it is, all of that can be plugged into this to some extent, right? So what this means is that if you wanted to motivate somebody to do something, right, you would do well to have as many of these core drives here as possible, if not all, if you can really design it to fit all this, right? So the first one is epic meaning and calling. basically it means that you give them a sense of purpose, or they feel that they are doing something bigger than themselves, or they were chosen to do something, right? They were like the chosen ones, for whatever reason, they were chosen and they got the chance to do something, right? And by giving this epic meaning and calling, you give them a greater sense that it's bigger than that, right? Whether it's volunteering or helping other people, or being chosen to, represent someone or a company to do something, right? So it doesn't always have to be on merit base. It could just be purely on luck. And they feel like, oh, I was the chosen one, for example. The next core drive is development and accomplishment. Basically, you give them the chance to kind of progress in something, develop their skills in a specific area, or actually overcome challenges, right? And this ties back to making sure that you have the right level of difficulty to match the ability. So if it's easy at the beginning, it's great. But as they progress, it should get progressively more difficult to match their abilities at their current state of time. Okay. So the idea is that when you give them a chance to accomplish things, they feel a sense of feel a sense of development, right? They're getting better at something. That's why people like things like, say, painting or writing or sports, right? Because they feel like they're getting better at it as they do more and more of it. Empowerment, creativity, and feedback. So this is basically being engaged in a creative process where you get to try things repeatedly, right? You do things repeatedly and you get different outcomes. You try it this way, you try it that way. It's kind of like music or art again. You try a different style or approach and you get a different outcome. And this is also a form of feedback, right? And this tends to be quite immediate. When you do something, say on a canvas, you'll see it differently immediately, right? It's painted on the canvas immediately and you see like, oh, you know what? It's different and I like it, I don't like it. And that gives you a sense of way to express your creativity and also a sense of feedback. Ownership and possession. Basically, you let them feel like they own something. They're collecting things, they own a part of an experience, for example, or they are building their collection of something, whether say like stamps or points in the system, or the number of friends they have, or the number of likes they collect on their post. So these are part of ownership and possession. Social influence basically involves people, right? So whether it's mentorship, acceptance, competition, companionship, envy, anything that involves other people is a form of social influence. Whether you get to talk to them, you get to compete with them in a competition, or whether you know that there are other people present in experience, right? Like kind of like right now, you can see how many participants there are in this talk, right? And the next one is scarcity and impatience, basically wanting something because you can't have it, because it's limited, or because it's exclusive, right? Or it's hard to get. And the next one is unpredictability and curiosity, wanting to find out what will happen next. Maybe you're curious, like a cliffhanger in the story, or you don't know what's going to happen in the next episode of say this series or whatever it may be. Or unpredictability. This could be a more negative thing. You don't know, you're afraid of what will happen next. It's unpredictable. You don't know how someone's going to behave. You don't know how a system will react. And that could drive you in two ways, whether you're afraid of it or you want to find out more, right? And depending on what you're trying to build, you can use this in two different ways, right? And the next one is loss and avoidance. This is basically you're afraid of, or you're trying to avoid something negative happening, right? So this could be used to say, like, look, if you don't come back to this experience every day, you will lose all your progress, for example, right? Or it could be that if you're not careful, you're gonna lose everything, or you're gonna be in danger, right? Whether it's physical or whatever danger, or it could be your position in the company is at risk or jeopardy, right? So again, this is quite a dangerous and very kind of scarring core drive to use. If you use it carefully and properly, it's okay. But if you use it haphazardly, you can actually cripple and traumatize the user, which is actually very typical and understandable to happen. So imagine, say Facebook, right? Say they say that, look, if you don't log in every day, you will lose all the friends and comments and everything. Your profile will just be deleted after that. And say you build, say, up to 1,000 or 2,000 friends, and then suddenly one day you couldn't log in because of internet issues, and then because of that, Facebook says, you know what, because you didn't log in yesterday, we're going to delete your profile. And that could be very traumatizing. All those years of building your profile and friendship and network, you just lose everything. And would you go back to Facebook? Probably not. Probably hate it forever, right? So it's something you want to be careful to use, and how you use it is very important, right? But it's still a form of motivation. Fear is a very strong motivator. Okay, so the last one is keep users invested, right? So it's not with monopoly money, of course. That'll be great, but it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And I want to introduce something called the hook model. I'm not sure if anybody has heard of this before. If you heard of it, just put in the chat, say, yes, I have. If you haven't, it's fine. So the hook model is by a gentleman called Nir Eyal. He's an award-winning author, and he's actually had a lot of best-selling books. I've actually had the chance to speak to him as well. And the idea is that this, if you see here, that you'll see a lot of similar elements from what we shared a bit above. So actually, the hook model is a great way to kind of sum up some of the things that we've shared so far. First, you must have a trigger, and there's two kinds of trigger. One is an internal trigger, and this actually is your motivation. Right? What is it inside you that motivates you? What is your personality? What is your being? What are you all about? And what makes you tick? Right? And this will differ depending on the person you are and the kind of user you may be. And the next thing is an external trigger, which is basically a call to action. Right? If you have the right call to action that kind of aligns with your internal trigger, then you will basically be willing to conduct an action. Like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I've been looking for something. I've been thinking about this. I've been feeling this way, and this trigger resonates with me, or call to action resonates with me, and then I will carry out this action. And then you want to make sure that the action is the simplest action to bring them towards a reward, right? And this reward doesn't mean monetary, of course. It doesn't always have to be. It could be anything. It could be a feedback, right? A reward could be just seeing a number grow up, a color change. It could just give you this small sense of satisfaction. And the smaller the reward or feedback it is, the simpler the behavior has to be, right? And of course, if you have a simple behavior with a huge reward, they'll make it even more impactful, right? And of course, is the reward fulfilling? Yet the reward should be fulfilling, yet it should give them a sense of wanting. So that means it doesn't make them feel 100% satisfied, where they'll be like, oh, you know what? I'm done with this. I don't want to come back anymore. Sure, some experiences, that's sufficient. Say, for example, like a training program. Once you get your certificate, you're done, right? You don't want to come back for another round of training, because if you've done everything already, there's nothing necessary, unless the training program has a follow-up session instead, right? Usually that cert is fulfilling enough, and then you're done. But in an experience, say online or in the workplace, you want them wanting more. Say you get a promotion, right? And in the workplace, because you've been putting a lot of effort, but then you want to obviously get more. You want to get promoted more. You want to get a high increment. You want to get more benefits. You want to get more fulfillment from your work. So you stick around because you want more. For a product experience, for example, like an app or a website, or even social media, you could be collecting friends, you could be collecting likes and all that, but you want more of it, right? Is that I feel satisfied, but I want to get more. I want to have this feeling again. So this leads to investment. So how do you get them invested in the experience, or whether it's a product, a service, a workplace environment, or even a learning environment to some extent, right? The way you do this is by getting them to do a bit of work so that they are able to invest something to the experience. So social media is a very good example. They do a bit of work, and then they feel like, oh, you know what? I've built up my profile, I've built up my connections, I've built up the number of likes, I've collected all these things, I've posted so many stuff. I don't want to lose all these things, right? And you don't have to put in a lot of work to do this, but you put in a little bit of work and you feel a lot of attachment to it. And if you're building something like a website, you could also do something like building a profile. You are able to collect things in your profile, or you're able to build some sort of, say, loyalty towards it by having a loyalty program. Say you collect points and things like that. As long as you deliver value, real value, and not just give points haphazardly for the sake of it, they will feel invested in the experience. And even a small form of investment is good, because if you have a lot of competitors in the market, for example, as long as your user is invested in yours, they will come back to you, right? Because they were like, oh, I'll go back because, I already have collected so much points. It's kind of like if you are, say, a Petronas Mercer points user, and you've collected all your Mercer points already, and you don't even redeem your points, but because you have these points, you have this card in your hand, you'll be like, I'll just go to Petronas. Why? Because I have the card, and I get petrol's the same everywhere else. I'm used to Petronas. I have these points with them. I might as well just go back to Petronas. I could get more points, and that might be useful to me in the future. And that form, a little bit of investment makes you feel like, a bit hooked onto a particular service or experience already, right? So this will then create a loop, right? Because once they invested, they'll come back, and the trigger will get them to do something again, and the loop continues over and over again. And this is also how you can also build habits, right? If you wanted to build good habits, just as a person, the way you do this is a bit different, but it all ultimately will require you to have a reward still, right? So habits require a good reward, right? So as long as you get a sense of a reward in terms of, say, accomplishment or something, you will build a habit towards something. But if you have investment in an experience, you will come back and the experience will become part of your habit as well. Kind of like, if you're a Facebook user, you would probably open Facebook at least once a day. In reality, you probably open it more than once a day. I think research shows that you open Facebook at least, I think maybe 40 times a day, if I remember correctly. And you don't even realize it because it's so short. You open it for a split second, maybe a notification comes in, which is a trigger, by the way. And then you click on it, you open Facebook for a second, and then you go back to whatever you're doing. And that could amount to easily 40 times a day. And you don't even realize it because it's so small. And because you do this so many times, it becomes a habit. And if you are anything like most people, you are probably addicted to social media in a very small way. It doesn't mean you are dependent on it to the point where it's unhealthy, but you are addicted to the point where you open it every day, right? And that's how habits or hooks work. Yeah, see, opening Instagram, because you're already hooked to the model, right? They employ the hook model. If you look at, say, Instagram, for example, there is a trigger. Maybe you get a notification, someone liked something, someone posted something. You go on your Instagram feed, you can look at things. Now there's even more things to look at. You can discover different stuff that are not from your followers or from people you follow. You can even look at those Insta stories. Now you have those TikTok like stuff as well, which are called Reels. So there's so many ways to get pulled into it. And the reward is that you click something, the action is to click something, whether it's to watch a reel or to watch the discovery page, and then you get a reward with content. Content is the best reward. And they keep changing the reward because as you get bored with a certain format, they give you something different. And the investment is that, you spend so much time, you build your profile, you've collected a lot of followers, you've shared your own postings and stories on your own reels. You feel like you have to come back because otherwise it'll be a waste, right? And the cycle continues, right? Okay, so now you know what you need to put into an environment to drive engagement a bit more organically, right? So then the question is, how do you design a user journey? So Omar has asked about ethical versus non-ethical. Okay, so this honestly, to design something ethical, it all boils down to intentions and the metrics, right? There is the main differentiator between whether you are building something ethical or not. Okay, and when you talk about the hook model, in fact, Nir Eyal, the one who coined the hook model, he also has a way to kind of avoid unethical use of his model. It's called the regret test, and it's actually really simple, right? So I'll just answer this question real quick. If you want to make sure that whatever you're building is ethical, make sure that the intentions behind this experience is ethical in the first place. You're not trying to manipulate people, you're not trying to steal their money or to get them to be unhealthy or whatever it may be. As long as your intentions are good, that's one step. The next step is that when you build something, when you've designed the experience, you want to ask yourself, would you use it? If you know, as a user, if you know what the designer knew about the experience, would you regret using it still? If the answer is yes, then you might want to change the way the experience is designed. If you feel like, no, I know how it works. I'm as a designer, if I was to be a user of the experience and I know everything that goes behind it, I will still use it because I feel I'm okay with it. I will have no regrets. And if that's the case, then you know that you have passed the regret test and it's completely fine to actually design the experience the way it is, right? But if you don't pass, you feel like, I would regret using it because I know how it works. Then you are actually on the wrong track. That means it could be unethical, right? The reason why social media, especially if you watch the social dilemma, I think which is a documentary by Netflix, it's a bit dramatized, but it talks about the dangers of social media. They actually didn't start off with bad intentions. They didn't want to manipulate people or get them addicted and use them as kind of a way to mine information to sell to advertisers. It didn't start off that way, but it became that way. But the thing they did wrong is that they didn't change. They kind of like, you know what, it works. We didn't intend for this to happen, but it's good for business. We'll just leave it that way. And that was where the they cross into unethical territory, right? So as long as you are aware of this as a user, then you're able to use social media a bit more carefully, right? You're not so haphazard. You know that they're actually trying to get you to use more of it so that they can mine more information. And if you're okay with that, you're like, you know what, whatever advertisements I get are relevant to me, are useful to me, I get stuff that will be great for my personal day-to-day or whatever it may be, then it's okay. Then, you know, you're getting the full experience. But if you don't like to see those ads, you don't feel comfortable with them mining information from you, then you might want to be careful as to what you do on social media, right? So it all boils down to whether you're comfortable with it or not. And that starts with awareness, okay? So I hope that answers your question. And the same thing applies to the hook model. As long as the intentions are good, then, and you don't regret the experience as a user, if you know what the designer had intended for, then you're fine. Okay. So let's move on to the last section, which is designer user experience. I've actually covered this before in previous episodes, but I want to just cover this briefly. So, so basically, when you want to design the experience, you must consider 4 phases, because users will go through these 4 phases naturally. The first thing is discovery. Discovery is basically when they learn into the experience. It could be by accident. It could be because someone shared about it, or there was an advertisement or something of the sort. They basically find out this experience even exists, right? And this one can be done through marketing, can be done through word of mouth, and anything, right? The next bit is important, which is onboarding. You want to make sure that they know how to use it, and you give them the right. It's either you make it really easy to understand so that you don't have to be taught how to use it, or if it's quite difficult, you want to have some sort of tutorial of sorts where you teach them how to use it. And the more difficult it is, the more handholding you might want to consider providing, right? And this means that you give them the support and guidance to be able to complete the activity loop once, which is like, oh, you know what, you do this, you do that. Okay, now you post it, and now you've done it. Good job. You know, and now you've done it once, you should understand how it works. Now you're on your own. And once they're on their own, they go to something called the scaffolding phase. And this scaffolding phase, basically, they understand how to use everything. And now it's up to them to experience as much as they can, or experience all aspects of the experience, right? They do everything, right? It's like for social media, for example, they have added friends, they have built their profile, they have joined groups, they have built their own number of friends, they have built their own content to post and things like that. So they've done everything. And once they reach a point where they've done everything, they're kind of very proficient at it, they reach a point of mastery or endgame. Depending on the experience, if it's something that continues forever, like say social media, then you want to build mastery. If you are doing something that will end, like a training program, then you want to have an end game. So this means is that they become veterans of the experience, and they've experienced everything at least once, right? And once they've experienced everything, what happens next? It's either you give them a pat on the back and say, good job, you're an expert. You give them, say, a certificate, which is for a training program. That means they know that they've done everything, and they can walk away feeling confident that they're accomplished in this field, or this training program at least. But if it's something continuous, you want to give them a chance to be able to be advocates of the experience, to share it with other people, to refer this experience to other people, or to even become thought leaders or have some of authority in the experience. For example, you could be an admin for a group, or you could be able to be a moderator. You can set up your own group in, say, Facebook, or you can create a business on a platform, or you can become advocates where you are able to share your feedback and thoughts to the designers so that they can fix the experience and make it better, right? So it could be anything depending on what experience you're trying to build. The important thing is that you make sure that they have something to do after they've done everything, right? Is to give them more meaning. Otherwise, it will feel boring. They're like, yeah, it's the same thing. There's nothing new. The way social media does this as well is by delivering more and more content, or different kinds of content. That's why Instagram and Facebook always changes the value proposition. Now they have reels. They share different kinds of content based on the algorithm. Is because to keep them from getting bored, they change the scaffolding experience. They're like, oh, now you are well-versed in this. The trend is this. Now we're changing to fit the trends, or we're trying to create a new trend. So now you have more things to experience and learn again, right? And this keeps them further away from mastery, or at least from getting bored in the experience, right? So again, there's many ways to go about this. It depends on what you're trying to build, okay? So that actually is the end of today's episode. I think, yeah, we're just right on the mark. We're 3 minutes away from ending, from hitting the time limit. And I want to kind of end this with a quote from Steve Jobs: get closer than ever to your customers, so close that you tell them what they need well before they realize it themselves. So if you know your customers well enough, you build a really engaging experience, right? You're able to deliver value that they don't realize they wanted, right? And if you understood how engagement is built, this will come this would also trigger some thoughts in your head, right? So I thought I'd just end with some thought-provoking quotes here. So I'm just looking at Omar's comment in the chat. Changing the interface to make people to not master the platform is a sense it feels like intentionally creating a pain point for the user. In some ways, yes. So basically, is you kind of constantly deliver value, right? So when they've already gotten all the value from what you've already offered, it's either you give them something new to experience, or you elevate the current experience, right? But when you talk about something like social media where you have so many users, right? And it's so complex and so big, yet it's so simple at the same time. You want to also deliver different options. So if you're just a passive and simple user, you probably don't want to start your own group or start your own business or be an admin or moderator for another group, for example. So then mastery is something that you don't really care for. But if you give them different kinds of content, so first, before this, you see a lot of content from your friends. But now the algorithm changes where you see a lot of shared content from your friends about the articles, videos that they probably didn't create. And now you are seeing things like, Insta stories and reels and things like that. So it's changing what you expect from the experience so that you deliver different value. So the scaffolding always changes as well, right? So I hope that makes sense. And all this boils down to what experience you're trying to build. Because if you're trying to build a training program, then the strategy that Facebook employs may not be effective to you, and vice versa. So you want to know what your format is, what your experience is, and then you try to match the engagement strategy to that as well, right? That's why we've kept this a bit more general, because it really refers to what you're trying to build, okay? So, which brings me to the next session, which is the Q&A section. So you might have some questions, maybe relevant to your industry or what you're trying to do or what you just want to learn, right? So if you have any questions, please share here. And to keep it a bit more neat and tidy, we'll do this over Slido as well. So scan the QR code, just go to slido.com and put in this number, and then it will bring you to a page where you can submit your questions. Or if you're really lazy, you can just put it in the chat. And I'll share and I'll answer your question anyway. Okay. So if you have any questions, please put it in this page so that we can all see it. I'll give you guys some time. It does take a while to think and write a question. But yes, if you have any questions, feel free. I think I'm thinking back to what some things that people have mentioned when what they wanted to get from this experience was also the difference between fake and real gamification, as they said, right? So I'm just going to go through this as I wait for questions. Fake isn't, I wouldn't say fake again, I would just say ineffective ways of using gamification. People will think it's fake if it's not matching to the experience. It doesn't fit the experience, or it doesn't achieve what you tend for it to achieve. In that sense, it becomes fake, it becomes fluffy. So again, there's so many types of gamified elements. You want to know, okay, what again are relevant to the metrics that you have pointed out. For example, it could be increasing sales, it could be to spread awareness, or it could be so that people spend more time on in your experience. So depending on what you're trying to engage, or sorry, you're trying to achieve in terms of your metrics, then you want to ask is what elements can you put in that will drive those things. So a point system, for example, can build loyalty. A badge system can give them a sense of accomplishment. Leaderboard will give them also a sense of competition and social influence. But those are not always effective if you're trying to build certain things, right? So for example, if you're trying to build a website, what does the point system mean to you? If you just give them points for the sake of getting points, there'll be no meaning to it. Nobody cares, right? I just spoke to a client earlier this week where they had a point system in their product, and I said, like, what's the point of this? No pun intended. The points are awarded and there's no meaning to it, right? So why would you put it in the first place? Nobody will care, right? So that's something you want to think about. Any examples of scaffolding? Okay, so scaffolding basically would be a lot of things depending on the experience. It could be about, say, adding friends, or clicking a button, or creating content, or doing a certain action like filling up something. As long as the scaffolding basically in this stage is whatever they need to do in the experience that you want them to do will be parked in the scaffolding phase, right? So if it's a website, it could be to say, leave their email so they can register for a newsletter. Or it could be they click through certain pages. Or if it's an e-commerce page, it could be to add stuff to their cart and purchase those items, or leave their contact, their credit card details and things like that. So these are different things that you can consider depending on what your experience is. Any good product examples of good gamification or good behavioral loop model? Social media is actually a really good example because that's something everybody can relate to and understand. Others, I think a really good one would be Duolingo. If you have heard of it, Duolingo is actually a language learning app. It's actually very, very gamified, and they've actually constantly been changing the way they gamify things. They've used a lot of great gamification and not so great in the past, and whatever is good they kept, whatever is bad they removed, and they added more good stuff. So if you really wanted to understand how gamification can be done properly, especially in a product, I would suggest Duolingo as a reference. In fact, I reference Duolingo a lot in my workshops and also in some of my talks. And I know a lot of gamification practitioners outside of my company and also in other parts of the world also reference Duolingo a lot because it's such a great product that uses gamification, right? It doesn't mean you should copy what they do because it really depends again on your metrics, but you could get some inspiration from it as well, okay? Okay, if there's no more questions, or if anybody is still thinking of a question and you don't have time to write out here, you can just put it in the chat. I'll answer you there. But I want to end this with a few things. One is, if you guys want to get more out of this series or you want to learn more, you can scan this QR code or type in this URL and it'll bring you to a simple like survey or questionnaire where you can just kind of put in your interest, and we will reach out to you if there's anything that may be relevant to you. So I'll just leave this up for maybe 10 more seconds. So again, we'll be doing more talks like this. There's another 3 more episodes so far in the series. I don't know if the series will continue longer than that. I don't know. We have not had plans of that conversation with Common Ground. If it does, great. If it doesn't, it's completely fine. All the things that will be recorded here will be also shared on YouTube at some point, and we can share those links with you. If you want to get those links, you can just put it, maybe you can put your email or some way we can reach out to you in the chat or in this form, and we'll reach out to you. Or if you're interested to join workshops, which we'll be doing with Common Ground or outside of Common Ground, you can also put it there and we will reach out to you as well. Okay. So before we end, I know some people are beginning to leave already. So before you all of you leave, can we just take a quick photo so that we have evidence that, you know, this was not just between me and some people at Common Ground. There's actually some people present here. So turn on your webcams. And I will now exit this screen real quick. And then I will use complex technologies to take a screenshot of everybody right here. Okay, so everybody just turn on your webcam if you can. If you can't, if you're maybe not dressed properly or anything like that, that's fine. So I'm gonna just take a quick screenshot. So smile at the camera. You guys want to freeze? Oh, I see someone doing freestyle already. Okay, so right, go for it, freestyle. I had to do freestyle because I have to press the print screen button with two fingers. All right, fantastic. So thank you so much, everyone. So if you guys want to get in touch with me, or if you have any questions for me, you can get my contact details over here. I'll share my screen again. It could be any reason you have questions, you just want to reach out. I know some people want to reach out because they just want to have a chat, let's have some coffee or whatever. You just want to, whatever maybe. You can reach out to me here, or we can connect on LinkedIn. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys around. So thank you so much for joining the session today. I hope you guys got a lot of value and hope to stay in touch with some of you, right? So take care and stay safe.